All right, so joining me now to discuss this insane NBA trade deadline that we had is Bruce Veliz of LastWordOnSports, Digest Media, and Bright Side of the Sun. How you doing today, Bruce?
I'm doing great, Eamon. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm ready to discuss this NBA trade deadline, man. It was a wild one.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the craziest trade deadlines in recent memory. Can you think of anything that's really topped this in terms of trade deadlines recently?
I can't think of anything that would top this in NBA trade deadlines, but not even just that, just any sports deadline since I've been alive, to be honest. I feel like the trades that we saw, especially one of the first domino effects to really kick off this trade deadline in the recent couple of days, just really set the NBA into a craze of turmoil where we saw more moves get done that possibly could have even happened without the big domino falling.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The Luka trade really set the stage, and it was certainly the most shocked I've ever been about any trade. Maybe
100%.
shocked I've been just in my life, period. So yeah, let's get into some winners and losers of the deadline. First, starting off on a positive note, who do you think won the deadline?
So ultimately, I think it's without discussion, even though I am a Celtics fan and you are too. I think one of the biggest winners of this deadline here was the Los Angeles Lakers. The Los Angeles Lakers took a big swing, like we said, did the first domino, traded Anthony Davis, got Luka Doncic, fully reset their roster, sent everybody into a craze, but they're rebuilding after LeBron, and not only did they do just that, they made some more moves around the edges. They wanted to trade Rui Hachimura possibly, but they didn't. Traded Dalton Connect, getting Mark Williams, who I think, yes, you did give up the 2030 first round pick, and you gave a 2030 pick swap, which does have a lot of problems with this contingency team in the future, but he is going to be a perfect lob threat for LeBron James, Luka Doncic. He's also 23 years old, so he's super young. He's going to fit in with Luka Doncic at 25. He's going to be the long-term center for this team, and he can get 16 and 10 on the Charlotte Hornets. He is going to do absolute crazy numbers for this Lakers team. They add him playing alongside Austin Reeves, some other moves with Dorian Finney-Smith. And this Lakers team, I think, is truly going to be scary just this season, but not only just that, but it's Los Angeles. They're going to be able to attract so many more free agents, make so many other players want to help with LeBron and Luka Doncic, finally get another championship. I think the Lakers, by far, probably the biggest deadline winner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really undeniable. You get Luka Doncic, who's a 25-year-old generational star coming off a finals run. Nobody thought he would ever be available, and you're able to give up pretty much one-for-one swap. You have the picks included, and then some of the minor role players with Max Christie, Maxi Kleber, who they ended up waiving, Markieff Morris. But ultimately, you pretty much swapped Anthony Davis, who's 31 years old, has a history of injuries, for Luka Doncic, this top three player in the league at worst. I mean, It's hard to get better than that, and it's really not about this year for the Lakers. Who knows if they're going to be able to contend for a title. I think you'd have to put them in this conversation after this move. But it's really about the future. Once LeBron James leaves, you have a star just ready to take the reins. And then the other move that you mentioned was the Mark Williams trade, which happened last night. And I think that's also a really good pickup for them. Just giving Luka Doncic that lob threat, that shot blocker, that rebounder. He's going to really elevate Williams' game. So I think that's a perfect match for them. And they did give up a little bit of value there with Dalton Connect and then the two first-round picks. But considering the low price that you gave up to get Luka and how well Mark Williams will fit next to Luka, it's really a no-brainer in my eyes. And yeah, just one of the most shocking trades ever, like we've said before, but it really blows my mind, and I still can't get my head around it that they were able to get Luka, because this is a team for months that we were talking about didn't have a lot of assets. They probably weren't even able to make a trade for an all-star level player, and then somehow they're able to trade for Luka Doncic. It's really insane.
Yeah, it's just absolutely crazy. I think you think you hit it right on the note where a lot of people thought that this was kind of the end of the Lakers tenure where, oh, the Lakers are going to finally fade out. They don't have enough capital to move off. It's finally going to be the over for Los Angeles. But then we obviously see them make that mega swing for Luka Doncic, and now once again they're just catapulting themselves. I think another shocking thing as well is, once again, not only with the Luka Doncic trade, but the Mark Williams trade came out of nowhere. No one knew Mark Williams was available. The Lakers just somehow were just getting the best, arguably two of the better players that no one knew was available out on the trade market. Somehow they got, which is just absolutely crazy that they're able to swing that. And you mentioned that I think they're in title contention. I don't think they're a title favorite or they're going to win the title at this point. I think they're in title contention in the West. But then you look after them getting off of some of these other contracts that they have. Some of these contracts that Rob Pelinka stupidly signed to 2-year deals last year where they all just picked up their option where the Lakers are unable to make moves. That then gives the Lakers so much more flexibility on the veteran market and just adding other roster talent as well. I think they'll add some more talent on the buyout market too. I don't know how many roster spots they have open at this very moment, but definitely think Los Angeles is not only going to be dominant now, but next season, the year after that, they're just going to be, getting everybody to go there, which, once again, as a Celtics fan, pains to see, but who knows? Maybe a Luka Doncic versus Jason Tatum rematch in the finals with the Lakers versus Celtics could do a lot of business.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the Celtics fan portion of this. It obviously sucks to see the Lakers get such a great player in Luka. However, that rivalry is totally ignited now with Luka and Tatum. They already sort of had a little rivalry of their own, so I think it's really cool from that side of things. And yeah, it's really shocking what Pelinka was able to do. I mean, if you look back a few months ago, this was a guy that most people thought was one of the worst GMs in basketball, and he just totally pulls this move off out of nowhere. The Mavericks only negotiated with the Lakers, and there's also some reports that Pelinka was even able to drive the price down for Luka, which is totally insane. And I still can't believe they only gave up one pick. They didn't give up a pick swap. They didn't give up another pick, which they could have given up. It just totally blows my mind, and I don't think I'm ever really going to be able to understand it. We'll get to the Mavericks side of it later. Obviously, they're not going to be in the winners, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I think you kind of put it really great with the Lakers here, just to get my final touches on it. It's just absolutely crazy that Rob Pelinka went from being one of the worst GMs and possibly getting outed and Lakers fans calling for him to be now praised and saving his job just because he could be able to pull these moves. Driving down the price on Luka Doncic just blows my mind that was even a possible conversation to even have between two GMs, and it just really questions how these GMs really function and how they work, especially when we get to some of the losers here later. It's just crazy to see how one move can really change your franchise just like this and just turn everything around.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get to our next winner, real quick, I think it's just important to discuss, how do you see the Luka and LeBron fit working out? Because these are two players that are very similar, very ball dominant, but also just incredibly intelligent basketball players, two of the highest IQ players in the game, sort of bigger guards in a way. I know LeBron's more of a forward, but he has that point forward kind of skill set. How do you see them playing off each other?
So I do think that they're going to work very well off of each other. Obviously, they both can play with the ball in their hands, off ball, so it will be very helpful. They do share a lot of similar skill sets, but I do think that the Lakers saw their next version of LeBron James and Luka Doncic, and that's why they definitely went out to make this move. I do desperately think that the Lakers, by losing Max Christie, losing that shooting ability, they're definitely going to be out on the market for some extra shooting, because you definitely need some of that around these players. And that's why I'm saying maybe even not this season if they can get in the buyout market, but next year they'll definitely be able to get some of those veteran shooters to put around these guys. And then at that point, it's really ridiculous. Austin Reeves being able to create his own shot playing off these guys as well is going to be even better. And Dorian Finney-Smith, the Swiss Army knife defender, I feel like his value's been a little bit disrespected around the league the last couple of seasons, maybe because he's been in Brooklyn, no one's been paying attention, but he can be very effective. Jared Vanderbilt, since he's been back in the lineup, is very, very, very good. So the Lakers have some good pieces around these guys. I just think maybe a little bit more of an offensive punch, but I think they'll be able to mesh well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really just fascinated to see that two-man game between the two of them. I think it's going to be incredibly entertaining. And just their basketball IQs, I just don't see a scenario where it's not going to work out. And
100%.
At this stage of his career, LeBron's 40 years old. He's going to realize that he has to take a little bit of a step back offensively, and I think he's going to be totally okay with that, especially playing with a guy like Luka. So, Lakers, obviously big winners. And I'm really also, before we get to our next winner, I'm happy you brought up Dorian Finney-Smith, because I think he's going to be crucial for them defensively, especially with LeBron and Luka. LeBron at this stage in his career in particular, not the best defenders. Luka, obviously that was the big concern from the Mavericks' perspective, was his lack of defense. I think he's going to be crucial as a versatile perimeter defender next to those guys. So,
yeah, and I think, like you kind of said, he fits like a glove around those guys as well, and he can play. The one key thing I see with this Lakers acquisition as well is Luka can play in many lineups as the point guard, as a ball handler. So can LeBron. You can play them at the 2 off ball. You can play 3. Dorian Finney-Smith can play 2, 3, 4. There's so many different versatility lineups with this Lakers team, plugging in Hachimura, Mark Williams, all their other shooters. That's what you look for with winning a basketball team. You saw that with the Celtics last year. So many different versatile lineups, so many different able to run different teams, and that gives different looks depending on matchups and stuff like that. And I think that's going to help the Lakers out a lot, specifically with Dorian Finney-Smith as well as a defender.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree with that. Now moving on to your second biggest winner of this deadline.
All right, so for our next big winner, we're going to go to another big trade that happened before the deadline just last weekend. We're going to be talking about the San Antonio Spurs because San Antonio Spurs, in my eyes, I think are a huge winner. Even if they only did make one move, if it was getting De'Aaron Fox, that man is going to be a perfect playmaker alongside Victor Wembanyama. And we already saw that yesterday. 13 assists. I believe that was the most assists in a Spurs debut game from anybody. You love to see De'Aaron Fox. He's been critiqued always been looked down upon in Sacramento, maybe because of the small market, but he's never been respected as a top 5 guard or one of these top tier guards. He's always viewed as just a guy kind of on the fringes, and I think next to Victor Wembanyama, he's going to be able to show that. He's going to be able to get these all-star bids that he's been chasing with Victor Wembanyama that he's been snubbed in Sacramento. And I think the best part about this trade for the Spurs as well is they didn't have to give up any young talent. They keep Jeremy Sohan, they keep Devin Vassell, they keep Keldon Johnson, Malachi Branham, all those, the Atlanta picks. They now have the flexibility to, maybe not this offseason, but in the future, if another veteran wants to go to their team and they want to upgrade at a wing and they have the expendable contracts, they can make that move and go all out and just continue the dynasty that they want to build with these players. Not even to mention guys like Stephon Castle, I forgot to mention as well. They have so much young talent on that team that they were able to keep. And that's, I think, one of the best benefactors of this with Sacramento.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really shocked at the value standpoint. I think fit, as you mentioned, it's a no-brainer. I think him and Wemby are going to fit perfectly together. It's really cool to see just a point guard that can push the pace a little bit more next to Wemby. I think that will be huge. And Fox has been one of just the best downhill players in the league, so I think it's just a perfect fit. And that's going to be a duo that's going to be contending for championships for years to come. Fox fits their timeline. Couldn't see it as a better fit in my eyes. And then, like you mentioned, from a value standpoint, it's massive that they didn't have to give up any of their young talent. Not just to Stephon Castle. You get to keep him. You get to keep a Devin Vassell. You get to keep a Jeremy Sohan. You don't even give up Keldon Johnson. You give up essentially 2 first-round picks, because technically it is 3. However, the third one is a lottery-protected Hornets pick that's not going to convey, so that will ultimately convey into 2 second-round picks. I mean, come on. You can't ask for better value than that for an all-star level, all-NBA caliber guard in De'Aaron Fox. And it's just really awesome to see Wemby with another elite guard after his rookie season where it was very lackluster in terms of the guards around him and the playmaking around him. Now you have Fox, our guy Chris Paul, and then Cassel, the rookie, who's just super versatile and another ideal fit next to him. So I think the Spurs just did a terrific job.
I think, speaking on our GOAT, Chris Paul, happy he stayed through this deadline. Happy he did not get moved. That was one of my biggest fears with the trade. But I also think you mentioned keeping a guy like Vassell is very key, because you look at this team with the shooting on the outside with De'Aaron Fox, with Victor Wembanyama. Vassell can create that outside shot similar to Malachi Branham. He was a little bit better last season, not the greatest this year in the stats, but you need that type of playmaking. When with Cassel also not having the best outside shot as well, you need that outside shooting. So keeping those guys is key. Sohan, one of their better premier defenders as well. They got to keep Harrison Barnes, one of their also key outside shooters. I think that San Antonio has already been well respected as a franchise already for their dominance, but they are really setting something up once again that is going to truly dominate this league with Victor Wembanyama, De'Aaron Fox, and whatever young guys blossom that they have, or whatever pieces they can get for those guys if none of them pan out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting, sort of as you brought up, to think about, is this going to be a core we see just totally grow together, or is there another potential big move in line for the Spurs? And I think that's something we'll see probably in the offseason or maybe at the deadline next year, depending on how the rest of the season plays out for them.
Yeah, I think it's more of a next deadline / next year, because with De'Aaron Fox, even though he is, I believe he's 26 or 20 at this point, he's still in his prime. And even though Vic is young and you want to rush to get Vic a championship, there's no rush at this moment. You can still evaluate these players, kind of see who really pans out. I think next year, if you don't see a leap from any of those guys, then you possibly look to move. But I think it will more be on the Spurs on trying to figure out who wants to go there and who's kind of disgruntled. I don't think they necessarily ship those guys out just to upgrade initially.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that's a great point. And then let's get into our third biggest winner of the deadline.
All right, so third biggest winner of the deadline here, I ultimately think kind of comes down in the catacombs at the end of the deadline here. They made a late day trade with the Cleveland Cavaliers. We are Celtics fans, but the Cavs just got a lot stronger and got a hole that they needed to fix, getting DeAndre Hunter. Now, I did believe they get Karis LeVert in George's knee, which they had a great attachment to Karis LeVert. I did see Karis LeVert drop 40 points in TD Garden, so I've seen him be a cold hooper. But DeAndre Hunter adds so many holes. They've needed a small forward. Last year, I wanted them to trade for Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith. I think DeAndre Hunter plugs in so many holes for them perfectly as that defender, and I really, really can't wait to see what he can bring for this Atlanta Hawks team as that wing guy filling in. And their Cavs are also possibly interested, as we're recording, I haven't seen, but possibly pursuing Ben Simmons as a buyout candidate. So that could be another guy that they could also add. If the Cavs are looking to add interior defense, add some better pressure at the wings, that can help beat them against a strong Boston team.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the timing of this trade is really interesting. We saw them on Tuesday lose to Boston, and their wins kind of got exposed. And I really think just bringing in a guy like DeAndre Hunter allows them to match up a lot better against Boston, as you mentioned. And just his versatility as a defender, his ability to space the floor, he's really a seamless fit. And Karis LeVert, with all due respect, I don't think he was the fit for this team. He's a great scorer, but you really don't need an isolation scorer like this. You need more of a spot-up shooter, and that's what DeAndre Hunter brings to the table. Hunter's having a career season, and I really don't see why the Hawks would totally give him up in this scenario. I get they did get 3 second-round picks back and then a potential pick swap back. However, I really don't see this value for the Hawks. I think it's an awesome move for the Cavs, and they're absolutely winners for me as well. And yeah, they're having a great season, and just being able to maximize this is huge for them. And filling in a position of need is really awesome, so I think great move for them overall. And I would say one of the most underrated moves with the deadline, obviously with all the stars on the move, DeAndre Hunter isn't going to draw a lot of attention. However, I think it's one of the most impactful moves with the deadline. And I think DeAndre Hunter himself is one of the most underrated players in the league this year. Just what he brings to the table as a defender, as a floor spacer, and as a guy who can occasionally get his own buckets.
Yeah, DeAndre Hunter, as you said perfectly, definitely going to be an underrated transaction here going to the Cleveland Cavaliers. I believe he was in that 6th Man of the Year race at this moment with Peyton Pritchard and was putting up a fight for this Hawks team with Jalen Johnson being there. Now, obviously, with Jalen Johnson getting hurt this year, I think that's what makes a lot of fans question this move a little bit more. I was kind of under the belief that they were trading him for possibly using him for Siakam last season. His name had been in discussions before, so maybe they didn't really find a fit. And with bringing Reza Shea in with Jalen Johnson, maybe they had too many wings, but it was working in Atlanta, and they were winning basketball when they were fully healthy. Unfortunately, which when we get to it a little bit later, the Hawks are a little questionable. So it's getting a little bit weird here with the Hawks, and I think I agree with you. I think this move was the Hawks helping the Cavs more than helping themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really fair assessment. Let's get to your last winner on this list.
All right, so when we get to our last winners here, my personal last winner is the Sacramento Kings. Now, they were involved in that trade with the San Antonio Spurs getting Zach LaVine, but not only did they do just that, but at the buzzer, once again, they got involved in that Wizards trade with Marcus Smart. They were able to get Jake LaRavia, and they only got off Kobe Jones and Alex Len. And they also did bring in Jonas Valanciunas for City Sissoko. So 3 moves for the Kings here, a little bit of a retool on the fly, but I think it adds a lot of help for them, honestly. I know a lot of people are concerned about the Valanciunas fit defensively alongside Sabonis, but the one thing that I've realized with this Sacramento Kings team, even 2 seasons ago when they were competing, was when Domantas Sabonis came off the court, they had no rebounder. And that's why Domantas Sabonis had to play 48 minutes a game in those Warriors series. By adding Jonas Valanciunas, that allows you to give rest to Domantas Sabonis, and they also can play a little bit alongside each other. Even if it's not the best fit, they can have some minutes alongside each other. And they definitely needed a backup big. I think adding Jake LaRavia as a wing defender is a very undervalued pick, as with the Grizzlies team, they just have so many players that they have to move off the contracts, and LaRavia was one of them where I think he'll be an underrated fit as a defender, helping out this Kings team. And then Zach LaVine, yeah, you lose De'Aaron Fox, who might arguably be a better player, but he didn't want to sign an extension, and Zach LaVine, quietly in Chicago, was putting up all-star numbers. You run into some turmoil, I like it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely fair points. I didn't have them in my winners. We were pretty aligned up until that point. We had the top three is the same. However, I don't hate the Fox trade at all for them. I would have liked to see them maybe get some more picks. I know the Spurs had a lot of the Hawks picks that could have been more valuable. However, I get it from their standpoint, and they were really put in a difficult position with Fox sort of asking out a week before the deadline, and he had that preferred destination in San Antonio. But ultimately, this is probably the best package they were going to get. And to your point, they really were in no situation to go into a full rebuild. This is a team that just made the playoffs for the first time in 16 years, just 2 years ago. So for their fan base to go into another rebuild, it would have kind of been disastrous. So you have to get some win-now talent, and I think Levine can be really impactful for them. I think the two-man game between him and Sabonis is really intriguing. And then to your point about the other acquisitions, I do like Valanciunas' fit on this team. I don't think it's ideal defensively, as you mentioned. However, again, to your point with the rebounding, I think it really is ideal, and you're sort of maximizing on that strength. And given Sabonis just another rebounder and backup center, which is really a position of need for them. And I do also think that they can play together specifically with Sabonis' floor spacing this year. He's been one of the best three-point shooters in the league. I think that's a really crucial development. So I think that's really overall pretty good for them. And then I like how they picked up Jake LaRavia as well. I think that's a really solid, underrated pickup. And then Devin Carter, I think, will really benefit from this opportunity. He's a rookie. He came back from injury in January. I think he might sort of get the reins to the offense a little bit, not totally obviously. However, he's going to get a lot more opportunity without Fox, obviously. And I think he can be a really impactful player from day one. Good defender, playmaker, good solid finisher. I think he can just have a really well-rounded impact for this team. So I do like it from that standpoint. And floor spacing-wise, I think adding Levine really helps a lot. Sort of similar to Malik Monk in some ways, and I think he can just really gel with this group really nicely. So I do like this deadline for the Kings. I can't put them in the winners category, but they're definitely not losers to me.
Yeah, I think you really hit on all the points, and specifically with Devin Carter, I really like his upside with this team, and I'm hoping for him and Keon Ellis with the move out of De'Aaron Fox that allows them to bring some more defensive pressure to this guard room, because that's what they desperately need. Playing with Malik Monk, playing with Zach LaVine, they're going to need that extra defense. And if the Kings, like they said, they've bought in with Doug Christie, they've been really, really good since the firing of Mike Brown. So if they can really unlock defensively, really fine-tune some edges. Offensively, they're going to be able to cook. They're going to be able to outscore some teams. That three-point shot just keeps coming back to them. They'll be fine. And I think the Sacramento Kings maybe could be a team that a lot of teams, people might be counting out, but might be able to shake some things up.
Yeah, for sure. I think I definitely agree with those points. Two quick questions for you. Where do you see this Kings team now in the Western Conference playoff picture? I think they're obviously competing for some of those play-in seeds, but do you think they can ultimately get a playoff seed? And then what do you think that closing lineup looks for them? Because Keon Ellis, as you brought up, he's been so crucial for them as a point of attack defender. I just don't see how you can sit him. But then are you going to sacrifice a guy like Malik Monk? Is Keegan Murray going to be sitting out in clutch time? How do you see that all shaking out?
Okay, so for this team, I think you brought up some valid questions. For the lineup, kind of looking at this team, they definitely need some defensive pressure. So I think you might have to take Monk out the lineup. You might have to go with Keon, Zach LaVine, DeMar, Sabonis. Maybe you take Keegan out and keep Monk and you slot everyone down. You go a little bit smaller, or maybe you double big with Keon to have the defense and just go some shooting outside with LaVine and DeRozan. I think they have a lot of flexibility with this team. When you look at them kind of competing for a spot, unfortunately in the Western Conference, I think there are 12 teams competing for a playoff spot right now. Just the three teams that aren't are the Jazz, Trailblazers, and Pelicans. And in that case, it's going to be very difficult for them. I don't know how their strength of schedule is at this very moment, but I would expect that the Kings try to be at least around an 8 seed, 7 seed, so I would say they're in the play-in. But if you're Sacramento, I think making the playoffs, even if you're a first-round exit, if you win a couple games, that makes the fans happy. It makes you happy that you're not in that rebuild phase. And then I still think that there can be moves around the edges, specifically even if guys like Devin Carter or Keon Ellis grow through this team, there also can be some good things as well.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. I really don't know, as you said, if they can make the playoffs, but goal is really just to make that 8 seed. And I mean, once you get into the play-in and those 4 teams, you really never know, especially with how close the West is. So I think it's worth it for them. However, I am a little bit concerned just sort of about the long-term upside of this team and their future a little bit. However, I think it's worth it for a franchise that's been so bad for so long. You kind of have to go for it in some ways.
Exactly. I think sometimes you just got a full send, and that's what the Kings are doing right now.
Yeah, exactly. Now getting to my last winner, I got the Miami Heat. The whole Jimmy Butler saga was just insane. We'll talk about it later for the Warriors side. Obviously, that trade went down last night at the time of this recording. However, I thought the Heat were able to just get a really solid package in return, get an Andrew Wiggins and then that first-round pick. We'll see if it conveys. If it doesn't, it's going to convey within the next 2 years. I think Andrew Wiggins is just an awesome fit for this Heat team. They need another win, especially with losing Butler. Wiggins is a really good defender. He can space the floor a little bit. He can really fit with any lineup. He can create his own shot as well. So I think he's a really good fit, and this is a Heat team that I can see really staying in the mix of things in the East. I don't think they're going to necessarily be a top 4 or 5 seed, but I could see them being a 6 or 7 seed and would kind of be surprised if they fell out of the playoff picture entirely. So I think it's really worth it for the Heat just to stay competitive, and then ultimately Wiggins, his deal expires in 2026 or 2027, one of the two I believe. And that just offers them a lot of flexibility for free agency in that season. And this is a franchise we've seen have the ability to land a ton of big stars. Obviously, LeBron James being the big one back in the Big Three era all those years ago. But this is an attractive city for a lot of stars, and this is really a stable organization. So I think they're really positioning themselves to land a star within the next few years. And I think ultimately for their future, this is a great move. Obviously, just getting off of Butler after this whole trade drama is huge, and I thought they got a solid return. I honestly wasn't expecting the Warriors to part ways with Andrew Wiggins in a possible Butler trade, just because he has been so crucial to them, and Butler's value I thought was just a little bit lower based on the last 2 months or so.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So going back to that Wiggins bit, that's something that I've been really harping on. I think it's very crucial for the Warriors to try to keep Wiggins, as not only he brought a championship, but on and off the court, he means a lot to Golden State, to Steve Kerr. And you saw before the game, I don't know if you saw, they obviously locked the room to do the trade, but Steve Kerr had a press conference before where he was saying that he didn't want to gut the roster, he didn't want to get rid of these young guys, and he has connections with these guys off the court. So it sucks that the Warriors are such in a win-now position because of how many of the other moves they've possibly screwed up in trying to get Lauri Markkanens and other things that they had to part with Andrew Wiggins here to get Jimmy Butler. But for the Heat side of things, I think it is a very, very solid haul. Wiggins, I think, is going to represent what you want as Jimmy Butler as a defender, and he fits in perfectly. He's not obviously going to bring his immediate offensive effect, but I think varies in a similar play style, similar to Jimmy Butler offensively as well, which helps. And they also got rid of PJ Tucker today as well, which I think was really, really solid. And they added Davion Mitchell, who I think is a perfect point guard add for them. He fits that Heat culture. He's going to play perfectly alongside Tyler Hero in that lineup as well. And I really do like this kind of overall thing for the Miami Heat. I ultimately did think that they would be able to get a little bit more for Jimmy Butler. I know, obviously, the suspensions, the holdouts, Jimmy Butler, I'm only going to this destination, and this destination only obviously truncates things. But I would have liked them to get a little bit more back in draft capital for Jimmy Butler here. But like you mentioned, it opens up flexibility, and Miami is a popular destination, has nice weather, can attract free agents. There will be people that want to play with Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, and whatever construction of roster this is. I'm also kind of confused on how they didn't get rid of Terry Rozier if they have Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson and Davion Mitchell now in this team with Terry Rozier, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think you brought up some good points. I didn't even think about getting rid of Terry Rozier, to be honest with you, but I think that would have been nice for them. That move they made at a previous trade deadline, a little bit before the trade deadline, and it just really hasn't worked out for them at all. He hasn't really fit. He's kind of declined in some ways, and he's aging. I think he's over the age of 30 now, which is kind of to think about, just thinking back to his Boston days, but he hasn't really gelled with that group at all. So yeah, I think it would have been beneficial for them to move off of Terry, but all things considered, and in the position they were in, I thought they did a really nice job, and as I've said before, I really like the Wiggins fit.
Yeah, I think Wiggins, like I said, fits that culture. Miami's really going to embrace him, and now Miami has a lot of possibilities as well with Hero and Bam Adebayo. They got Jovic, they got Wiggins, they got Davion Mitchell, Duncan Robinson, Jaime Jaquez, Kelly Ware. They have playable pieces, and once again, tradable young assets to where if a star does get disgruntled, they can go out and get said star and bring him to their team. Or if a guy doesn't want to sign an extension and a guy's just a rental, they can go get said guy. And I think that's where Miami's going to kind of make their moves next year as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is just ultimately an organization that never wants to be bad. And from that standpoint, I think it's going to work out really nicely for them, and ultimately they're going to get a star at some point. Now moving on to our losers. Let's kick it off with our biggest loser. I don't think anybody's going to be too surprised with this one. Who you got?
The Dallas Mavericks?
Yeah. It's a pretty obvious one.
Yeah. Very questionable decision making from Nico Harrison. Like we said earlier when we talked about the Lakers, everyone thought Rob Pelinka was the worst GM. Well, no, Rob Pelinka put something in Nico Harrison's coffee and made him the worst GM when they went on that coffee date, because trading away Luka Doncic, regardless, I think a lot of people are undervaluing like AD. AD isn't he isn't day-to-day Davis anymore. He's a top 10 player in the league. He's very good on both sides of the ball, but I think if you traded AD for Kyrie, it would be a little bit more head-wrapping. I think the fact that it's Luka Doncic, a 25 perennial All-Star, and what you're saying you're wanting to win a championship and push for a championship when he brought you to the finals last year is a questionable thing for a reasoning. And not only did they do just that, I like their addition of Max Christie, but they traded away Quentin Grimes for Caleb Martin. And I don't know if you saw this today, but Caleb Martin is hurt now, and the reason the Mavericks are doing this deal, they had to send an additional second-round pick to get this deal done. So it's a little bit questionable. Nico Harrison would rather long-term salary over potential extensions, and that's very questionable for me if I'm a fan. I think they're going to be competitive in the playoffs. I think they'll be in that play-in mix once again with some of these teams. I think Kyrie and AD will be very solid. AD gets to go back and play the 4. I think that'll be very nice. But it's a very questionable move to go all in now on two 31-year-olds when you had a possible 25-year-old to believe in.
Yeah, exactly. I think short term, I think it could potentially work out. I still have them as title contenders. We'll obviously have to see how seeding shakes out. They're sort of outside that playoff picture right now, especially when they had Luka. He was injured for about a month, so that obviously hurts. However, when they get into the playoffs, I do think this can be a really formidable team. I think their front court's really good. I think they match up with a lot of teams in the West. However, you only have, as you pointed out, two 31-year-olds. You only have a, 2 to 3 year title window max? Compared to with Luka, you had a 10-year title window? I don't understand how you can come up with that one. I don't understand how you only get AD. Max Christie, solid player, don't get me wrong, but you only get AD, Max Christie, and a first-round pick back. 1 first-round pick for Luka? Come on. I mean, I think everyone was really shocked on that. Just really terrible value for Luka. The fact that they only consulted the Lakers, in some way, I can understand it a little bit because you don't want it to get out that Luka's available. That would make the rounds. However, I feel like you really got to see what's out there for Luka. There had to have been better packages. I think most teams would have made a better offer than this. As we talked about earlier, the Lakers were kind of depleted with assets. So it really doesn't make any sense. And I do think it's really interesting just to think about how Nico Harrison and Rob Pelinka, as Nico Harrison discussed, they had a 20-year relationship. They were friends. I think that part's really interesting. I think the NBA could maybe look into that a little bit, especially just given how weird this trade is. And Nico's explanation was a little bit strange to me. He said defense wins championships, which is true. However, I think a balanced group wins championships, and I also think you really need to have that top option offensively, which Luka is. He's one of the best scorers in the league. He's one of the best offensive players in the league. And Kyrie and Anthony Davis, throughout their career, they have shown to be brilliant offensive players, just not that number one option on the title team type of guy. So I think that's really curious in my mind. I just don't get it. I mean, I think everyone's sort of in the same spot. They don't get it from Dallas's perspective. Who knows? Maybe they do win a title and it kind of works out for them. But at the same time, I have a hard time imagining Luka not winning a championship in LA and Dallas winning a title. So I just find it really, really odd. And the other thing that I find a little bit odd about this is once the trade came out, my first instinct was there has to be something going on with Luka. Whether it be his injury is more serious, maybe there was some serious disconnect between him and the Mavs front office. The condition and stuff was mentioned, but nothing really serious came out about that. So it's just totally puzzling to me. It just seems like Nico, for whatever reason, didn't like Luka. Maybe he thought sort of that Jerry Krause mindset that organizations win championships and he was responsible for building this team, so he wants to get credit, and he makes this really, really risky trade.
Yeah, I think you really hit it on all cylinders. 1, it's really risky. 2, selling a 10-year championship window for a 3-year championship window doesn't make sense. We've seen with Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis, both of them be very successful as secondary stars, not as first stars. So I don't necessarily see where this move really moves the needle for Dallas. I think that you also brought up a valid point too, where even if you win one championship in Dallas here, right? If you're a Dallas Mavericks fan, if you win one championship with this roster, cool. Well, that's if Luka wins 2 or 3 with Los Angeles. Then how do you feel? Like, it's still a lose-lose. You can't erase that, because then you could possibly be like, well, as if those stars wanted to come here because we had Luka. Like, there's so many possibilities that you could throw out the window with that, and I just don't know. Of course, we'll have to wait and see. Like you said, there was conditioning talks, overweight talks, all this stuff. He looks perfectly fine. He looks like he's going to be good, so we'll have to see on the court. If it really comes down to a personal issue, like you're saying, like a Jerry Krause issue where I'm controlling I'm the manager, I have a problem with Luka, I'm trading you, then the owner of the Dallas Mavericks needs to have a conversation with somebody, because that's bad malpractice in hiring of your franchise right there. That is not having an interest of the best, which is the fans.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I really don't. You brought up the ownership part. I really don't understand why ownership would sign off on this. Not just from a basketball standpoint, from a business standpoint. Luka, one of the most popular players in the league. You can make a lot more money with Luka there. They just went to the NBA championship. It's beyond puzzling to me. I'm really not going to understand this one for a while unless we see something crazy come out, but at this point I don't expect that. It could legitimately go down as one of the worst trades in NBA history. And the upside is maybe they do win a title, but as we discussed, it's very, very likely that Luka, the 25-year-old who just led the Mavericks to the championship, will lead the Lakers to multiple titles. So.
Exactly, and I think one thing that you just brought up right there is it's going to be viewed as the worst trade in NBA history, and I think the general managers of the Brooklyn Nets who traded for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett just got a little bit of a smile on their face right now, because maybe they're not going to be the guys getting mocked trading for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown away, because this might go down as a even worse deal, possibly, depending on what the outcome is for the Lakers.
Yeah, for sure. I think this trade's been talked about a lot, so I don't think we have to harp on it too much. Unless you have any parted thoughts on the trade, I think we're good to move on to who's your next loser.
So when we look at losers, we've talked about the team that's been involved in the Sacramento trade twice as winners, one my winner, but we're going to look at a team that's a loser in that trade. And golly, man, the Chicago Bulls, ladies and gentlemen, the Chicago Bulls. Kenny Beecham. I know he's probably not watching this, but shout out Kenny Beecham. I feel so bad for Kenny and what he has to deal with. Trading Zach LaVine for Zach Collins, Trey Jones, and Kevin Huerter. 2 guys with 1+1 deals, so they're going to be on the roster next year. You traded for your first-round pick back that you would have gotten back even if you were a bottom 10 team and if you tanked. And you got Trey Jones, who's the bright young spot, but you have 8 guards on the team. You then also don't move Nikola Vucevic, and you re-sign Lonzo Ball. Now, re-signing Lonzo Ball I don't think is terrible. I think that kind of I'm happy for Lonzo that he was able to get a contract, get a guaranteed deal, but I would have loved to see Lonzo in a contender. I think he serves better as a backup point guard, and maybe the Bulls will trade him in the offseason, but not moving off Nikola Vucevic is a huge red flag, and it's just a similar thing we see with the Bulls. I guess if you ever see the Chicago Bulls put a player in trade rumors or trade talks, wait 2 to 3 seasons and then he'll be traded, because it doesn't happen the first go around, and we've seen that with Zach LaVine, we've seen that with Nikola Vucevic, and it's just a very disastrous story. I don't know if the Bulls think they can compete in the East, but there's no way.
Yeah, I also have the Bulls down as a loser. I don't get this one. I think it's good to move off LaVine, start the rebuild, especially as before they didn't have their pick, it was top 10 protected. I think that's a solid idea, but in that case I think you kind of have to go all in. You have to trade Vucevic as well. Even if the value's not there, it's clear this organization has no problem for settling for terrible trade value. And yeah, like you said, the 3 players they got back, they're not long-term fits, and they're not even really short-term fits, especially with this roster construction. Zach Collins really isn't anything special. He's a fringe rotational guy. Kevin Huerter's having a down season. He can shoot the ball a little bit, okay. Trey Jones is probably the best piece, but they have, as you mentioned, 8 guards. They're running 4-guard lineups. It makes no sense when you have this team to bring in another guard, especially as the centerpiece of a trade. You do get your own pick back, but as you mentioned, you probably would have gotten that back anyway if you, as long as you stay in that top 10. So it just really doesn't make any sense. I know LaVine's value was low, but I really think they could have gotten more. Maybe not with this specific deal. Maybe they could have looked elsewhere. Or even from this specific deal, I do think they could have gotten more. How can they not even get Keldon Johnson? I mean, his value isn't super high, but he definitely has some upside. He's he's a shooting guard, small forward type of guy, so not necessarily a perfect fit, but he does have that versatility. He's a very strong player. He's a solid defender, so I would have liked to see them take a shot at like a Keldon Johnson. I don't know why he would have been off limits from the Spurs' perspective, so it really doesn't make any sense, and this is just terrible value for a guy that's having a really amazing season. I get some of the injury concerns and the contract concerns with LaVine, but he's averaging about 24, 25 points a game, shooting the three ball really well, creates his own shot at an elite level, offers some playmaking as well. It doesn't make sense to get this bad of a package back for him. They should have traded him probably 2 years ago, realistically. However, I get holding on to him, but just for this package, it makes no sense.
Yeah, it just makes no sense. I think they definitely should have traded him a little bit earlier. I think they could have gone a little bit more. I know they were interested. Warriors were interested in him for a little while, and they wanted him and Vucevic. And even now, you get filler, right? Like, it's just filler. I'm telling you, the Warriors would have given you a lot of draft capital for that trade, probably, because it's two guys. And you then would have been able to get some sort of potential, because you know the Warriors are going to fall off after that run with them, and you're probably getting capital after that. So why wouldn't you want to do that? I have no idea. And it's just a very, very puzzling thing. They also, like you mentioned, could have gotten Keldon Johnson, could have gotten Malachi Branham, could have gotten one of those extra guys, not like a Sohan or Vassell, but someone else. And then they got three guys back, but then we're trying to trade those three guys. We're unable to trade those three guys. And then because of that deal, because they took in two of those guys, they had to waive Torrey Craig and Chris Duarte, who Torrey Craig had some veteran minimum, offers out there, and they didn't want to add second-round picks for that, but you're trading for players, waiving players that you could have gotten trade value for. Like you said, last couple of seasons, selling players too late, not getting enough capital, like with the Caruso deal. It's just very, very puzzling what their front office has been deciding to do over the last couple of seasons, and I just want to see them strip it down and just go to the bottom. Just fully embrace it. The Wizards had this problem a little bit a couple years ago, but now they're fully embracing it. Chicago just needs to do the same.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think it's really interesting that this is their third trade with the Spurs. Originally, they get back DeMar DeRozan, and then the Spurs were actually a part of the sign and trade involving DeMar to the Kings. They ended up getting more draft capital by just taking on Harrison Barnes in that deal than the Bulls did for DeMar. And then the Spurs swoop in again, and they help make this trade possible with the Bulls. And to me, it seems like the Spurs are sort of sensing that this is a weak front office, and it almost seems like they've been bullying this front office. They feel like they can get really good value off of them and sort of lopsided trades, and I think that's a little bit telling to me. And as you brought up, I think the Warriors package could have been a lot better, and I think it could have been better for the Warriors even to bring in a guy like Zach LaVine next to Curry. I think he would have been a perfect fit in that system with his capabilities as a shooter, shot creator, and as well as Vucevic. I thought he would be a perfect center in that system as a sharpshooter, guy that can stretch the floor. Doesn't offer a lot of defense, but when you're playing next to Draymond Green, that doesn't matter as much. So I thought it would have been really awesome if the Warriors could have brought in those two guys in instead. And from the Bulls' perspective, they would have got a significant amount of value instead of this.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that. I kind of forgot that they were involved in all those trades. But yeah, I think that's exactly how it puts. I think San Antonio Spurs, if they want to do a deal, they're like, can we get Chicago involved? Let's figure out a contract that we could get them involved, because we know they are a terrible front office and they'll just do whatever. So we can finesse them. We can do something like that, and I can see that easily happening. And I think you brought up another valid point with LaVine and Vucevic. They would have been able possibly not to trade Wiggins by getting a Zach LaVine, maybe. I don't necessarily know, but you still need that defense. And then they also, I saw, gearing up to the deadline, had a deal with the Warriors for Vucevic, but then the talks stalled. What do you mean the talks stalled? You're the Chicago Bulls. Take Kevon Looney, take Gary Payton, take 2 or 3 seconds, and get... Do you think Nikola Vucevic next season is going to command 2 first-round picks? No. He's older. You have to make... If a team is that desperate to make the move, you have to make the move. There's a time when you realize you have to make the sale, and the Chicago Bulls have been in denial for 4 seasons.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't totally looked into the reports that came out today, but leading up to the discussions, it seemed like the Bulls were super focused on getting a first-round pick in return for Vucevic. Seems a little unrealistic to me. So yep. I would have just settled for several second-round picks, bottom out, let it go. Vucevic's value is not going to get any higher. He's having a really good season, but he's only getting older. He's only going to have less time on his deal. So it really doesn't make any sense not to trade him at this deadline. And yeah, just totally don't get it for the Bulls. Even when they did make the Levine deal at first, wasn't the best value, obviously, but I was kind of holding out hope that they could have at least sold Vucevic and then got something decent in return for him, but just didn't work out for them.
Yeah, it's just terrible malpractice by the Bulls. And like we said, unfortunately, if you are a Chicago's Bulls fan, I feel bad, man. You just maybe have to make that switch like the Mavericks fans have been over the last couple of days.
I can't blame anyone who's a Bulls fan for switching up, not the least. Let's get to your next loser. Who you got?
All right. So for my next loser, I got one of the teams that I talk about and cover, and that's the Phoenix Suns, baby. The Phoenix Suns, man. One of the teams at the height of this trade discussion, this whole trade deadline. They're getting Jimmy Butler. They want Jimmy Butler. They're going to do whatever to get to Jimmy Butler. To then, they're trading Kevin Durant. They're trading Kevin Durant for Jimmy Butler? Wait, what are we doing? What's going on? To Kevin Durant declined to trade, to we're still trying to move Beal, to Bulls didn't even bother. They just said, no, not possible. And then they just said, we'll give you Nurkic for Vasily Micic and Cody Martin. Now, Cody Martin, I think, will be solid. Vasily Micic is but they need to make other moves. They're going to keep Bradley Beal off this bench if they're really going to run with Tyus, which they promised him a spot, which he hasn't been playing, deserve it this second half. Then Grayson and Beal playing off the bench together is just two of the same styles. It's redundant for this team. I would have liked to see them add, again, a backup big, because now we just have Mason Plumlee, who has proved multiple times that he cannot succeed, and he once again is now going to be the backup center. So the Suns still do have some holes, and now they have 15 guys on the roster. So if they want to make a move, they have to waive a guy. So are you waiving a guy to get a potential buyout flyer that potentially might not even be good? That's the case. They did save some money in the luxury tax by moving Nurkic and moving Josh Okogie, which was nice. But time is ticking for the Phoenix Suns here and Kevin Durant, because it's not looking good at this very moment.
Yeah, I didn't have them in my losers, but I can definitely understand why they were in your list. Really, just overall, this era has been incredibly disappointing. Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal. This team has so much potential. I thought they were going to be a top 3 seed this year with Budenholzer coming in. Didn't work out at all. Have a lot of roster flaws, specifically at the center position. I think it's a win that you're able to trade away Nurkic. Value isn't ideal. You did have to include a first-round pick, and you're already depleted with a draft pick, so not ideal, but it's a win to get off of Nurkic. I think Cody Martin can be a solid fit, I guess. But yeah, overall, not too exciting. I never saw the Butler stuff totally, especially with the Beal issue. He obviously didn't want him. They couldn't find a third or fourth team to help facilitate that. So I thought they were just really in a challenging position. So that's sort of why I didn't have them in my losers. But yeah, overall, just not a great deadline for them at all.
Yeah, I feel like for the Butler stuff, it was definitely more of a Butler request and the Suns front office request. I think both of those parties desperately wanted to get it done. But with the no-trade clause with Bradley Beal, Miami clearly didn't want him. He would have opened the no-trade clause to them. And then I believe that if he were available to other teams, per se, that those teams that would want to take on his contract and would value him, he wouldn't waive his no-trade clause for. Therefore, you're at a tough roadblock. And then that's, the hindrance with the Suns is the front office and the moves that they've made over the past couple of years. Trading DeAndre and Toumani Camara for Grayson Allen and Yusuf Nurkic, and then flipping Yusuf Nurkic. You traded DeAndre and Toumani Camara in a first for Grayson Allen, Vasily Micic, and Cody Martin. That's terrible looking back in hindsight. Chris Paul, once again, our boy. Unfortunately, the Suns thought he didn't have value. He came back once again like he did when the Rockets forgot he had value, and has risen through the occasion once again. At $40 million, I don't care. He still has some value. They could have gotten Jordan Poole in that contract. Jordan Poole, even if he is Bradley Beal, is a little bit younger, a little bit more flexible. There's no need to get Bradley Beal in that no-trade clause. The Suns front office has just made some terrible decisions. I would have traded Nurkic for a burnt cookie. That's what I was saying earlier. You needed to get him off the roster at least. So I'm not mad with the return that they got. But yeah, they look like they'll be trying to head underneath the first apron next year. And if they can move Beal under the first apron and ensure Durant some security, then sure. But from sneaking under Durant under the rug and almost trying to trade him to the Golden State Warriors, I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Overall, they're the 10 seed right now. Where do you see this team finishing in the West? Do you think they can make a playoff push? And then ultimately, what do you think it's going to take to retain Durant and Booker during this offseason? Because from my perspective, unless they win a first-round series, which seems like a stretch to me, I have a hard time believing that both Durant and Booker will happily return.
Yeah, I don't see a first-round series win. I'm hoping for not a sweep this year compared to last. I think 1 or 2 wins would at least make me happy. I want to see a good second-half push. Ultimately comes down to Budenholzer. I think that this team has the possibility of being in the conversation of where the Kings are, probably around that 8-9 if they are competing in the play-in, but I don't think they'll be a lock play-in spot. But I could also seeing them, if they don't make the changes and still keep Beal off the bench and don't bench Tyus, completely falling out of the play-in, not even making the play-in, being one of those 11 or 12 seeds. And at that point, that's when it's complete disaster for both of them, because I think at that point you can't even reassure to both of them that you can keep them. I think that both of them will want to go at that point. But if you're Durant, if you're Booker, you might be able to salvage it just because of the franchise, but you have to get rid of Beal to salvage it. There's no way ifs or buts. I think Beal has to be off the roster, even if Durant's gone as well, to satisfy Booker. If there's no way, then you're going to be watching the Phoenix 2019 Washington Wizards with old Bradley Beal.
Yeah, exactly. I think really what this era's highlighted is how you have to have a balance when you're constructing a roster. It's just not going to work when you have 3 players that are so ball dominant, 3 really good shot creators, but you really need to have more balance, especially in the modern era. It just doesn't work. I think 5-6 years ago, this could have really worked out, and that kind of stuff didn't matter as much, but now just the way rosters are constructed, this roster's kind of set up to fail in many ways, so I think that's what we're seeing here with this Suns team.
Yeah, and the crazy part is, too, this is not to blame Kevin Durant in all of this, but Kevin Durant's last team that he was on, the Brooklyn Nets, ran into a similar problem with Kyrie Irving and James Harden. So you would think the Suns front office would see that when they traded for Kevin Durant and realized, hey, maybe we shouldn't get another ball-dominant guard that can play on Frank Vogel's team that's a defensive-minded head coach. But the front office honestly could rival maybe Nico Harrison if they made that move for Jimmy Butler for Kevin Durant. They would have been rivaling Nico Harrison onto the fans' level perspective for sure.
Oh, yeah. Those rumors totally threw me off. I think another interesting thing that the Suns did was they traded was it their last first-round pick that they had, or do they still have one more?
No, that was their last one, yep.
So they traded that. They did get 3 first-round picks, but just giving up another first-round pick in the position that they were in, I don't think it makes much sense. I think it's really risky, especially 5 years down the road. We really don't know how good this team's going to be, and it's very likely that they'll be in a rebuild, and they'll really want that pick back.
Yeah, I think for this Suns team, you kind of valued that you were going to get Butler. I don't think there was a backup plan. I think it was Butler or bust. And that's why they traded that first round pick, because they thought, hey, if we get these 3 first round picks, regardless, we'll be able to get Butler. But that was not the case, and that's what pushed them into that corner. I think that if you had not made that deal, and if you had kept on to that first round pick, maybe a team would have been enticed to take that 23rd one to see how desperate you were, because they see how desperate you are now, and they think, even if they make this Jimmy Butler trade, Kevin Durant's not going to want to re-sign after this season, so it's going to be beneficial. But when you give up that leverage to the Utah Jazz, it makes it more difficult, because the 3 picks that they did trade for, yeah, they were first-round picks, but they weren't valuable first-round picks, and the Suns were viewing other teams to view them as just first-round picks.
Yeah, for sure. I think you really summed it up nicely there. Now moving on to my next loser. This is a team nobody's really talked about at the deadline, but I think they're a sneaky loser. And that is the Orlando Magic, unfortunately. This is a team I really do enjoy watching their style of play. I like Paolo and Franz a lot. However, I'm a little disappointed they decided not to make a move at all. They're 3-10 since Paolo's returned, which is really shocking. They fell from the 4 seed to the 8 seed, and they have the 29th ranked offense, and they're dead last in 3-point makes. I think this is a team that just desperately needed another either creator or floor spacer, specifically at the guard position. And I think not getting one is somewhat of a failure. I know they have a young team, so it's really not as big of a deal as some of the other teams we're talking about. And I think they're ultimately still going to make the playoffs. But upside-wise, I think they really needed to add another shooter. We saw that in the playoffs last year against the Cavs. They just really didn't have the shooters around Paul and Franz, and I never think they're going to be super successful until they add at least another shooter. We thought KCP could have been that guy. In the offseason, he hasn't really panned out. He's having a very down year. I would have liked to see them get Anthony Simons from the Blazers. I would have even liked to see them explore Zach LaVine trade, especially considering how low we ended up seeing him go value-wise. I think there was just a few moves that they could have explored, and I'm really disappointed they literally did nothing.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Magic were one of the teams that were super quiet around this trade deadline. You heard nothing about reports, rumors, nothing. They're usually like that. But that led to me kind of going into today after seeing all these big moves yesterday, like, okay, they're going to be the team that makes a move on the edge or something like that, right? Because nothing has come out. And you mentioned a guy like Anthony Simons. I think he's a perfect fit that they could have looked at to add last offseason. He's a perfect kind of scorer. Guy like Colin Sexton. I even saw Kobe White was a guy that was thrown around as trade rumors as well. And we mentioned the Bulls as a loser. If the Orlando Magic are calling you and offering you Cole Anthony and draft capital, you take that deal because they're upgrading a little bit. You're still getting a similar type player and stepping down a little bit. Like there were ways for this Magic team to definitely get better offensively. And like you said, they're a very good defensive team, and I think they needed that offensive jump. And something to keep an eye on with them, similar to a team like the Grizzlies and stuff, is they have a lot of players that are pretty good or deserve playing time. Guys like Jett Howard, Cole Anthony, that haven't really stepped up and delivered. And they also have like cheap contracts. Jonathan Isaac makes the most on their roster. So for this team, if you wanted to go for a big splash like Zach LaVine, bringing on a $50 million contract, this was the perfect time to do it because Paolo's on his rookie deal. This is still, Franz's extension is going to be kicking in next year, but he's cheap this year. You have the flexibility to do that, and now I fear with them possibly getting a little bit more expensive down the line, they're going to run into the problem with, should we commit to this guy? Should we re-sign him? Oh, we'll just re-sign him. And then they'll re-sign the guy won't pan out, and then they'll be stuck looking to force to trade him to get off the salary or to try to find another hole to add some more offense when they could have done it, like we said, either this deadline.
Yeah, for sure. I think patience overall is a really good thing, especially when you have a younger team like the Magic. But at some point you do have to make a move, and I really do feel like this was the time to make a move. We saw how successful they were and how deep they were without Paolo and Franz for that stretch. However, it really hasn't worked out at all since Paolo got back, and I really just think that's a testament to their lack of shooting. I really like the other names you brought up, Colin Sexton and Kobe White. I think both of those players could have been perfect fits for this Magic team, and I'm disappointed they didn't explore that. I'm also a little disappointed Colin Sexton just didn't end up on a contending team.
Yep.
He could really make a strong impact, and he's just a really good overall player, much improved shooter, really good scorer, plays a little bit of defense. I thought he would have been a really valuable piece for any contending team, and the Magic would have been an awesome fit, but just didn't work out for them, and they're kind of stuck a little bit. I think they can still rise up. Maybe they can get back into that top 4 or 5 range, but playoff time, with their lack of shooting, I just have no confidence in this team.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, too. It's going to be when it comes down to playoffs, how can their offense really combat and who their matchup is as well. If they're going to be going up against a very good interior defensive team, like if they match up against the Cavs like they did last year, there's going to be no chance for them to put up a fight versus a team like that, and that's clearly going to show. And like you said, maybe patience is what the Magic want to do. Maybe they hear through the rumblings, like we've seen a guy like Trae Young could be on the move. Maybe they feel like that's more of a win now move to help out their team, and they'll make something on the horizon. But I definitely see the Magic being one of the top tier contenders in the East for a while now, if they can fully build this roster around Paolo and these guys by adding that shooting for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's move on to your last loser.
Okay, so for our last loser here, there were some questionable teams. One team that we talked about was the Hawks. I want to kind of dive into them a little bit as well, because we brought up how the Hawks were trading away DeAndre Hunter, right? And kind of questionable that they are doing that, right? Like, why are they making this move? They have no Jalen Johnson. They don't have their first-round picks. And that kind of alludes to the Trae Young discussion, because now reports kind of from Chris Haynes and stuff that there's some murky discussions with Trae Young. So could the Hawks be going into a little bit of a session rebuild? They traded Bogdan Bogdanovic as well for Terrence Mann and Bones Highland. I don't mind that move for them, as Bogdanovic was a guy that was, eyed on the trade market. But once again, Clint Capella is still an Atlanta Hawk. Out of all the players they could have traded, Clint Capella, the name that's been thrown around probably longer than Zach LaVine in trade rumors, probably longer than Miles Turner in trade rumors, is still on the Hawks.
Yeah, I thought it was a really puzzling deadline for them. I thought, especially with the Jalen Johnson injury and the bright signs that they did show making the NBA Cup run earlier in the season, I thought they could have just found a nice replacement for Jalen Johnson. And I'm really disappointed they didn't go in that direction. They sort of decided to take a step back in some ways. Also, I'm not the biggest fan of the Mann and Bones Highland trade, just because they ended up giving up those 3 second-round picks, which they got from the Hunter trade. It kind of made the Hunter trade look a little bit logical. I was like, okay, I can kind of see where they're coming from. At least they got pre-picks back in that, and then they immediately ship it out for Terrence Mann and Bones Highland, who haven't looked great. I'm a big Bogdanovich guy. I understand he's having a down season. I don't think his value is that low where you have to attach 3 second-round picks to him, though, especially when you're not getting players that are going to be all that impactful for you. So, yeah, I think it was a really rough deadline for the Hawks. I would have really liked to see them pursue Ingram, especially seeing how low he went. And, yeah, they're absolutely a loser for me as well. And then, like you mentioned, keeping Clint Capella, who is on an expiring contract, I believe, it's just very questionable. I think they could have moved off him and get some value. I think Okongwu's a much better center. Just totally open up the opportunity for Okongwu, which has probably, it's been a long time coming. He's probably deserved it for the last few years. So just a really weird deadline. And then I think it's a good point that you brought up with Trae Young's future with this team. I don't really see him having much of a future unless the Hawks are able to sort of make some noise in the playoffs. I think they could still be a playoff team, but if they not first round, they're obviously going to be a first round exit if they make it. But if they can't even if they get swept in the playoffs or something, I think Trae Young could really ask out, and rightfully so. I mean, he's never really played with outside of DeJounte Murray, which was an awful fit. He's never played with an all-star player. Jalen Johnson was showing signs this year, but they never really have surrounded him with that talent. I thought this team fits nicely around him with all those bigger wins. But then as soon as your second best player next to him goes out, you go the opposite direction. I could see him really being upset with that front office, and I can't blame him at all.
Yeah, I definitely don't blame Trae Young on possibly wanting to move out. Like you mentioned, the DeJounte Murray fit was not great, and I think the next best player you could say is like John Collins, maybe. So, yeah, exactly. Just absolutely ridiculous for Trae Young. Definitely deserves a little bit of a better situation for there. But for the Hawks kind of idea, I understand why it's very questionable for a deadline to do this because they don't have their first round pick. I would have liked to see them if they did this next offseason. You know what I mean? I think that's a little bit more understandable as a franchise. And once again, Clint Capella being a free agent, not getting moved. Onyeka Okongwu, like you said, has been deserving the starting job. Was a top 10 overall pick, hasn't started for this team in the last couple of years. Just doesn't make sense. I get he's 6'8", he has some height limitations, but he's a freak athlete. He's a fantastic rim protector, shot blocker, rim protector. I saw him in TD this year, and he was absolutely destroying the Celtics on the glass. Like, you need to let that fully grow. They have Dyson Daniels, Jalen Johnson, Zachary O'Shea. I like that mold and build if they want to kind of build it, but I don't get why you make that decision this year. I think, like you said, you should have kind of pushed for the playoffs. Would have liked to see them if they were interested in Ingram because it would have been a rental. You could have went in on it, maybe gave up a little bit that you didn't really care about, and then you could have ultimately reset and reflipped if you wanted to go the different direction next year.
Yeah, exactly. Just one quick point before we move on to our next topic. I think it's really important that you brought up the lack of draft capital because this just makes it just so much more inexplicable to me when you don't have your pick going in the opposite direction. I mean, for what cost? I mean, why not just keep DeAndre Hunter around? And you're taking on more salary in that deal. That's the other part. The cap. Mm-hmm. That's the other part of the deal that I really like for the Cavs. They were able to save a couple $1 million on that, and then conversely, the Hawks take on money as they're getting worse. And as they don't have their draft pick. It totally makes no sense to me, and yeah, I'm totally puzzled by that one.
Maybe the Hawks and Cavs general managers have a connection like Nico and Rob Pelinka that the league needs to find out about because maybe they're helping them out just like they are.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's Landry Fields in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think it is.
Altman. I know Corver, he has some role in the front office. And he played under Altman, so yeah, it could be something there.
Maybe.
Could be something there. So there's a bunch of moves that we didn't talk about just the way we set this up with the winners and losers. Let's just circle back to some of the bigger moves that we really didn't get to. Starting with the Warriors trading for Butler. What do you think of that deal for the Warriors side of things? We did talk about it a little bit for the Heat side, but what do you think of it from the Warriors' perspective?
So for the Warriors, once again, I think they needed to add the star talent, but I think they've taken so many swings and misses at this point that it was kind of a desperation swing here. I did see a tweet where I believe Butler, Draymond, and Curry are all under the same extent with this extension, are all off at the same year, which would allow the Warriors to, build into this timeline for this 2 years and a half to really push and then kind of reset, which does help out the Warriors a little bit. Once again, I think that there could have been better moves that the Warriors should have gone for. Personally, I think a Lauri Markkanen over the offseason would have been a better system fit and better fit around you, and it would have maybe even allowed you to get a Nikola Vucevic a little easier, and then you would have a little bit of a better team competing. in the Western Conference. So I think ultimately from the Warriors, the inability to sell on some of their young talent and sell on some of their players and draft capital has really limited them to getting their top resources to compete with Stephen Curry. But I think with Jimmy Butler, Draymond, and Steph, they'll be able to be solid in this Western Conference. Don't know if they're a top 4 or top 5 Western Conference team, but I think they definitely got better, and they'll be in that mix with the Suns, the Kings, and all those other teams trying to fight for those play-in spots or last playoff spots.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly. I think we're super aligned on this, like most of the topics throughout the deadline so far. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth the risk, but it is definitely seems like a desperation move to me, especially because they haven't been able to land that star. The reports came out earlier in the week that they called about every possible all-star, which is interesting, and I'm glad they did their due diligence. I don't think Butler's necessarily the best fit. I do think it's good to have another shot creator next to Steph, and specifically someone in clutch time that can take the pressure off of Steph is massive. However, with Butler, he really hasn't shown the ability to consistently play regular season games. I think that's a concern. I think his age is concerning to me. He's 35 years old. Just that age and availability factor is a concern. And as we discussed earlier, I really like Wiggins. I thought he was a really good fit for this team. So that's a little bit concerning to me that you give up Wiggins. The other thing I didn't love about this move was the floor spacing aspect. I think they're going to ultimately be fine because Steph Curry is the best shooter of all time. However, with Draymond and Butler together, you have 2 questionable floor spacers. I think that's somewhat of a concern. And then the other thing I didn't love was they immediately extended Butler. They gave him the 2-year, $120 million extension. I think it's interesting how you mentioned that his contract, Steph's contract, and Draymond's contract are all set to expire in the same year. However, I just don't like that value for a guy that hasn't shown he can consistently play regular season games, constantly causes drama, questionable floor spacing, is only going to get older. I just don't like that value. I understand they probably had to give him the contract to make this trade go through and for Butler to be open to playing there, but I just don't overall love it. I don't hate it, though, because, like I discussed earlier, I think it's really important just to get another star next to Curry, especially last several years they've been in all sorts of rumors. I think it was just definitely time to get someone next to Curry.
Yeah, I think it was just kind of, like you said, just definitely time to finally strike a deal after they've missed so many times and after so many delayed misses. But I don't think it's the perfect fit. I think you mentioned the injuries, the consistency in the regular season. That's been one of the Warriors' big concerns. So having a player like that being added doesn't make any sense to me. And then you also add into the fact that the Warriors are, believing in Jimmy Butler to help them. And what happens if this fit doesn't work, right? Then now you're pushed into a corner where, well, Curry, we're sorry that your last championship push was with this. You know what I mean? Like, we couldn't do anything better. I think that they had multiple opportunities to get better stuff, and they ultimately floundered in all of that, and that's what's kind of limited them to be doing things. I just wish that they were able to get Markkanen. Even not as like a Warriors fan, I want to see the best fits, the best possibilities, and I think that Curry definitely deserved that. In 22, he proved that with Wiggins and this team that they could win a championship, and yes, he's declined a little bit, but hasn't declined that far to where you could completely eliminate him from those conversations and leading a team to a chip.
Yeah, exactly. I really feel like some of the decline conversations with Curry are a little bit overblown, especially just looking at this roster. They don't have many competent creators next to him, so in that aspect, I do like this move, but yeah, definitely not ideal. Another thing I want to bring up is the Kuminga piece of this. I really thought they should have traded Kuminga at the deadline. I understand maybe they didn't get what they were looking for Kuminga. However, he's going to be a free agent, a restricted free agent this summer, and I just see a team, for example, the Brooklyn Nets, giving him a max contract offer, and I just don't think that's something the Warriors are willing to match. And I think they're ultimately going to lose him for nothing. So I think that aspect has gone a little bit overlooked, and I think that's something that doesn't really bode well for the Warriors.
I agree, and I don't want to compare it as 100% like this, but I think the Warriors with Jonathan Kuminga are kind of running themselves into an Ayton situation with Phoenix, where they're going to be forced into a situation where they're going to have to match a contract that they don't want to, just to make sure that they keep their security of their player so they don't lose him for nothing, and then that's going to make them either pay a little bit too much for a player that they feel is worth it, that they don't think is valued at it, or B is just going to drive more frustration for Kuminga because he wants to be somewhere else and now has to go back to Golden State and play in that role, and then that causes frustration and turmoil with the team as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good comparison, honestly. It's just, either way, it's not looking great for the Warriors in Kuminga's situation. And he's someone who's had open concerns with Steve Kerr. So I I don't see why you wouldn't try to get some sort of value before he enters free agency. Ultimately, before we move on to our next big trade that we haven't talked about yet, where do you see the Warriors finishing in the West? Would you be surprised if they are one of those odd teams out and they don't even make the play-in?
I wouldn't be shocked at all, just because of the limit ability that they do have. We have to wait and see, obviously, with the buyout guys and kind of all those once these trades get finalized, who really gets moved on the edges, because some of these teams like the Warriors, the Lakers, they could make those moves if they have the roster spots open to beef up this roster. Because I believe the Warriors sent out Slow-mo, correct?
Yep.
So they sent out 3 contracts and only got back 1, so they still have 2 open roster spots, so they'll definitely be able to fill those with some quality level players, and I think that's something to keep an eye on. I have a higher likelihood of the Suns possibly falling out than the Warriors making it. I think the acquisition of Butler could possibly take the Warriors above the Suns. I think that the Warriors are, like a lot of these teams, are kind of just in that conversation of where they're all good to make the playoffs. They all have their questionable holes, so which one will stay the healthiest and which one will be able to click the best to really ensure it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the health factor is just crucial, obviously. If you had to rank these 5 teams, which are all separated by 2 games, or 2.5 games, with the Mavericks, the Kings, the Suns, the Warriors, and the Spurs, how are you ranking them for the rest of the season?
So for the rest of the season, well, if all teams are fully healthy, I have to probably say that the Mavs and the Warriors are probably 2 of those top teams. I think that they're going to be in the competition. I think then it's a real conversation where what the Spurs can potentially do. I think from their first game with De'Aaron Fox, we already seen the potential what this team can be, and I think they're going to be an early riser. So I could see them passing both the Kings and the Suns. I'm going to put the Suns, honestly, at last, just because I think with the frustrations in the locker room, they're just not going to be able to get over it this season. And that's honestly very frustrating now that I'm saying it out loud.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with those rankings. I might be a little bit higher in the Spurs. I might have the Spurs second. I just, with Wemby, how well he's playing at a top 10 level, arguably top 5 level. And then you pair De'Aaron Fox with him, you got a lot of good young pieces around those guys. And then Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, just 2 awesome veterans. I think the Spurs are going to be a playoff team to me. And I'd put them just slightly above the Kings and the Warriors, and then I would also have the Suns 5th, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a case for the Spurs to be up there. I think that we'll have to see how the young guys lack to the inexperience, competing in these games, especially late in the season when, all these teams are separated by half a game, and maybe a matchup is basically you win, you go to the playoffs type deal. You know what I mean? We'll have to see when it comes down to those moments. But I could definitely see Chris Paul and all those veterans like De'Aaron Fox and stuff like Harrison Barnes waking up this young core and being like, we win this game, we make the playoffs, let's go do it. And they could easily get it done, beating like a Sacramento to get there or a Golden State to get there 100%.
Yeah, exactly. That was sort of my thought process there, just especially with the play-in tournament, those single elimination style of games. I want Wembanyama, and I don't think any of those teams have a matchup for Wembanyama. I mean, has a matchup for him, but specifically those teams, I think he would be a matchup nightmare, so I really give the Spurs an advantage there, and I think they're going to make the playoffs.
I agree. Now you got me changing my ways while we're talking about it. I'm going to have to watch the Spurs stock rise up through the rankings in the second half.
Yeah, I'm just super interested to see how that playing picture shakes up for the West. I think we got 5 playoff caliber teams there, but ultimately only 2 of them can make it. Who knows, maybe the Clippers or Timberwolves drop a little bit, but it's going to be super interesting to see. All right.
Exactly.
Next trade we're going to discuss is the Brandon Ingram one. We haven't talked about this at all. I think we're both sort of aligned where neither team really won, per se, but neither team had an awful end of this deal. What are your general thoughts on the Ingram to the Raptors trade, which was a surprise?
Yeah, I mean, who thought the 16-win Raptors would pursue a sweepstakes for an all-star caliber player or star caliber player? But yeah, the Raptors get off 2 contracts that they necessarily weren't going to keep long-term. I'm very confused on why a third team didn't get involved for Bruce Brown, but if he is going to go to the buyout market, that obviously makes sense. But I think Olynyk will help out the Pelicans, playing alongside Zion, playing alongside Missy. I think he's a little bit of a buy low type of guy. Could be a flippable guy for them as well in the future, possibly next season. But Ingram to the Raptors just had Scottie, Pascal, and OG, the 3-wing lineup, and they're bringing it back once again. Masai's buying low, potentially going to sell high, but I think with this move with the Raptors, as long as you're not paying him the $40 million extension that he wanted in the summer, it's a W. And two, as long as with this move you see a posture of moving either Brandon Ingram, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickly, one of these potential players to get an upgraded star to put with Scotty Barnes or use Scotty Barnes to get that upgraded star, then obviously I see it being a win-win for the Raptors. But at this very moment, I think it's a little bit of a head scratcher for them. And for the Pelicans, like I said, I would have tried to see if some other team would have taken that capital for some from expiring contracts that potentially nobody wanted to get even more draft capital since we're tanking.
Yeah, for sure. I mentioned the Hawks earlier for the Pelicans. I thought that could have been a better deal for both sides. Ultimately, I think the Pelicans probably did the best with what they could. Ingram's been on the market for just about a year. He's constantly injured. He's a free agent. Not going to get much value. I think it's crazy, honestly, that they got a first-round pick. I know. A top 4 protected Pacers pick, I believe, 2026. So obviously not the best pick in the world, but just getting any first-round pick for Ingram, I think, is a win. For the Raptors side, I was shocked that the Raptors made this move. I really thought they were just trying to rebuild. So I was shocked they were trying to be buyers. I thought they might have gone the other direction, maybe traded a guy like Podol. I wasn't surprised that they traded Bruce Brown at all. I thought that made sense. Ever since he ended up in Toronto last year, the rumor was that he was going to get traded. So that definitely makes a lot of sense to me. But I don't know. Bringing in Ingram with this core, like you said, I don't think it's necessarily the best idea. I just think, especially with this loaded draft class, the Raptors should have been focusing on trying to get the best pick possible. They didn't have their pick last year. I would have really, really tried to focus on just getting the top pick and just building with this younger core. Not sure how Ingram fits in with that timeline totally. Basketball-wise, I think it's a solid fit. I know, like you mentioned, the 3-win lineup didn't totally work out for them last year. However, I do think it's really good just to have a bunch of scorers next to Scotty. He's a solid creator, but I think one of the things he offers the most is just his playmaking, especially at his size. So having some scorers next to him, I think, is a smart idea in the long term. But in the short term, I think this can kind of come back to bite them. When you look at the East playoff picture, they're only 4.5 games back from the play-in. So I think this team is really capable of putting together a stretch and then somehow they sneak into the play-in. I think that would be the worst-case scenario for this organization with this loaded draft class, like I've been saying. There's a lot of potential. Obviously, they're not going to go to the playoffs, win a series or anything, but I think there's a lot of potential to sort of make a run here towards the end of the season, which isn't ideal for a Raptors team that should really be looking to rebuild.
Yeah, I agree 100%. They should definitely focus on this draft, and who's to say that obviously Ingram was being gauged at this market because he is a restricted free agent and stuff like that. Who's to say that you needed to make this move, right? You could have gotten off of those contracts in other ways to help you make even marginal moves around the edges, and then you could have done something. So it is a little confusing, but with Ingram being out, I don't know how necessarily long he is out for. I'm hoping that it can stall the Raptors a little bit. It's just a weird decision, like you said. I think kind of investing into that youth move, specifically with teams like the Celtics and the Knicks being atop of the Eastern Conference and being in that division, like I think taking a book like the Nets and maybe settling down just a little bit and kind of teetering around your roster and then waiting to make that big time move when you could potentially be a top 6 team would have been worth the strike more than making it now. Yeah,
for sure. I think that really sums it up nicely. The last sort of bigger move that we haven't discussed so far is the Kuzma for Middleton swap. I thought this was one that kind of surprised me. I understand it a little bit from the Bucks' perspective in terms of getting under the luxury tax. I think they got out of the second apron with this move, but what was your overall impressions of this?
So I got a lot of impressions with this because it's very perplexing to me. I understand it in some ways, but I don't understand it in some ways. When I look at the fit, Chris Middleton was coming off the bench. He had double ankle surgery. He's getting a little bit old. I understand you need to make the move, regardless of the attachment like the Bucks fans feel to him. As Celtics fans, we all have an attachment to Marcus Smart. Unfortunately, he had to be traded for a championship. If you need to, it's a business. It sometimes has to be done, unfortunately, as much as how painful it is. But Chris Middleton needs to be that guy to go, specifically with adding Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo. But I don't necessarily know if Kuzma was the perfect need. Now, If they traded Bobby Portis, if they had moved Bobby Portis, I would have liked it a little bit more. You could have a little bit easier run having a lineup with Giannis as a small ball 5. Maybe you could have traded Bobby Portis for Bruce Brown or that defensive 3. I know they were interested in Marcus Smart last night as well, but those trades didn't go through. But, a defensive piece like that, I think, would have been a little bit of a better ad. I also think that they're a team that could have been interested in Brandon Ingram if this trade package was so low. Why didn't you go and get Brandon Ingram? A lot of people were critiquing the Bucks for, they're really going to trade Chris Middleton for Bradley Beal. If that was an option where Bradley Beal was willing to waive his no-trade clause to go to, you traded for Kyle Kuzma, I arguably think that Bradley Beal, even if he is a little bit more money, if you drop beneath the second apron, that could have been a possible move as well. So I'm a little bit confused by the Bucks. I think the Bucks wanted to make more moves, but since they were limited by being in the second apron for so long, they were unable to do those. I think if they were in the first apron, they would have had a little bit of an easier time of rearranging their roster. But honestly, as a Celtics fan, Kuzma is a good fit, but it's not moving me or scaring me as a Celtics fan to put them into a category with the Cavs, the Knicks, and the Magic at this point, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I think you summed it up really well. I mean, Kuzma, he's having a down year. He's not shooting the ball at a very high level. Never been a great defender, so I don't love the fit totally, but he does offer them some front court size, allows Giannis to play the small ball 5 a little bit more. So I understand it from that perspective, and then getting out of the second apron is pretty big for them as well. It's definitely time to move on from Middleton, unfortunately. So I kind of get it. I don't love it, though. I think they definitely could have done better, like you said. From the Wizards side, I kind of think it's a good move. Chris Middleton isn't going to make you guys all that better. So that's huge for a team that wants a top pick. And he is going to bring that veteran leadership, hold some of those young guys accountable. I think he's going to be a really good presence for them in that locker room that sort of lacks that accountability and leadership. So I think that's huge for them. They also did pick up Marcus Smart. Who knows, maybe they'll buy him out or something. But just bringing in those two guys, I think, is pretty big for that locker room, just to develop some of these young players and develop those good habits. I think that it's definitely a smart idea. Additionally, the Bucks did give up A.J. Johnson, who was a first-round pick in the draft, and I think that's another good young piece for this Wizards team that's in the midst of a rebuild. Johnson's a little bit of a project player, but I think bringing him in for the Wizards makes a lot of sense. See what he's got. Never really made sense with the Bucks because they're trying to compete now. So with the Wizards, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I like this trade for the Wizards. Not enough to put them in the winners category or anything, but I think solid deal, and I think it makes a lot of sense for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Wizards aren't in my winners category, but I liked a lot of the moves that they did. They made some financial moves. They got some additional second-round capital, got a first-round pick for Jared Butler. They did some things around the edges, and I think adding Chris Middleton is a perfect piece. And at this point in Chris Middleton's career, making around $30 million, I think that he is going to be with this Wizards team. And I don't think there's a problem with him being with this Wizards team. I think if you want to teach Coulibaly, Bub, all these young guys, have an extra shooter around them, he's a perfect fit for what this team ultimately does need. And I think that opens the door as well, not obviously this trade season, but for the Wizards to explore a Corey Kispert trade, where Kispert's been a piece similar to their rotation, but expendable, kind of like Avila has been, where last season we saw him get moved for Malcolm Brogdon, and I could see them doing something similar. I think the Wizards are trying to take a piece of the Rockets handbook here, where the Rockets had those young pieces, but had Dylan Brooks, had Van Fleet, had these veterans around them. And yeah, Chris Middleton, Marcus Smart, Malcolm Brogdon doesn't scream big-time acquisitions, big-time veterans, but those guys can help the young guys learn how to be good players. They're all stars, all guys that played on championship competitive level teams that can get that winning culture into Washington, and then possibly maybe Chris Middleton, after that first year, signs to another team on a cheap contract. But at least he helped out Washington and that foundation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sums it up perfectly. And overall, I just really like the direction the Wizards are headed in. After years of just mediocrity, I think they got a new front office and started with the Beal trade, but they've really been moving in the right direction ever since. Before we wrap up, is there any other moves or teams that you really liked a little bit under the radar that you just want to give a quick shout out to?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to give a quick shout out to two teams that I really liked, and this is something that if I were a general manager, so if any front office is ever going to watch this in previous years, this is what I would do. Is I'm really liking what the Blazers and the Jazz are doing. Now, or not, excuse me, not the Blazers, the Wizards and the Jazz, like I said, which is investing in this young talent. And that's diving into these young players and really going to. You saw Danny Ainge get involved in so many of these moves. The Luka Doncic move, the PJ Tucker move, the Dennis Schroeder move, the KJ Martin move. In all of those moves, he's getting extra second-round picks. And for a team, a small market like Utah, who, yes, has so much young talent, yes, some of these guys are going to get waived, but you get them that extra capital for when they need to make that big time move to get that star to Utah. They have so much draft capital to get it done because no one's going to sign to Utah. No one's going to choose to go there. And I think that is a big key in what Danny Ainge is doing. I keep an eye out for Lauri Markkanen next season as well, possibly, as a guy. And I know he likes the fit there, but I think that the Wizards and the Jazz are doing this really, really nice investment movement with these young guys. And for small market teams that need to hit the rebuild, they definitely should do it. And for the Blazers, they need to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I like those picks for sure. Definitely agree. I think those are two teams that are just built in the right way, kind of like you were saying. I do think the Blazers could have sold a little bit of their guys, as we mentioned with Simons earlier, but overall, I think they'll be fine. They are on a little win streak, but I don't think they're going to be good enough to where it totally ruins their draft capital. And they have a pretty fun young core, so I'm not terribly mad at them for not selling at all, but I would have liked to see them make a move for sure. The other team I want to give a quick shout out to is the Detroit Pistons, running in Dennis Schroeder, Lindy Waters, and Josh Richardson. Those are three players who really fit nicely with this team. I'm not going to do anything crazy long term, but for a team that's having a really surprising season, trying to make a playoff push, I think those are three guys you can really bring in and they can make an impact. Schroeder in particular, without Jaden Ivey, who suffered an unfortunate injury. I think he's going to really help them and could potentially help the team make the playoffs ultimately, which is surprising considering they only won 14 games last year, but the Pistons have been an awesome story. So I think adding some window talent and some guys that can fit next to Cade is a really smart move for them. And they really didn't give up anything in these trades, so good for the Pistons. I think they did really well.
Yeah, I have to 100% agree. Shout out to the Pistons. They needed that secondary ball handler with Ivy getting out, but not one that's going to demand the ball, take the ball away from Cade Cunningham as he's their primary scorer and ball handler. So Schroeder can kind of play with that bench unit, can also, play alongside Cade Cunningham if they realistically wanted to at some points, but I think as a secondary ball handler is going to be fantastic. And as a good another bench unit point guard with Sasser and stuff, this Pistons team is looking very solid. Definitely low value and hit a home run on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope they can maintain their playoff position. They're currently the 7th seed. I'd love to see it. I really enjoy watching this Pistons team, especially Cade. I think it's been an awesome story, and I just wanted to give them a quick shout out on the way out.
I agree. I'm really liking what I'm seeing with them, and hopefully they can make that playoff push, or even as an 8 seed, it would just be fun to see them just in the playoffs. Even if they didn't win a game or won one game, I know the Pistons fans would be happy, and a lot of other fans around the NBA would be happy to see them once back in the playoffs too.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Bruce, appreciate you coming on. We're going to wrap it up here. We had an hour and a half to talk about the trade deadline. I think we really hit on everything, and yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. Before you head out, just anything you want to plug, social media, writing, digest media work, anything, just give a quick shout out to yourself. Let's hear it.
I appreciate you so much, Eamon. Once again, thank you so much for having me on here to discuss the trade deadline. Like we said, we hit up a lot of stuff and breaking down, and it was a fantastic time. Can't wait to chop it up with you once again. But guys, if you want to check me out on my social media platforms, you can follow me at Blue Sky and on Twitter at Bruce Veliz, where I post all my NBA stuff. You can also check out my writing for Last Word and for Bright Side of the Sun, where I do write for the Suns. And if you want to catch me on video format, similar to this, you can check me out on Celtics and Suns Digest, where I make content for Digest Media, alongside my personal page for Switch City, where I talk everything NBA. But once again, shout out to Eamon for having me on here. Absolute fantastic host, and I can't wait to see what he can bring for you guys more here on this podcast channel as well.
Appreciate it, Bruce. Yeah, it was a great first episode, and definitely going to have you back at some point. Appreciate it. Take care, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much once again, and I can't wait.